Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to a stock market outlook video sponsored by Investors Business Daily. And as usual, we'll cover the market indexes. Then we'll move on to potential new leadership and how these stocks are performing at this time. And this is usually a great kind of sneak peek into how the overall market is doing as well. Then we'll move on to my focus list, talk about how these stocks performed this past week. Then we'll move on to sentiment from a few different sources, including these market indicators from IBD. Then we'll talk about the name exposure index, the IBD Big Picture article, and then finally the GMI Signal from wishfulball.com. And if at any time you enjoy my analysis, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And let's dive right in and start with the indexes. So overall, first taking a look at the NASDAQ composite, we are now below the 21 EMA on this index, and we had really been holding that line as well as the 10-day simple during this entire uptrend from these lows. So overall, this Monday, we had not the greatest day. We did have a gap up, it moved down, and then it moved back up. But once again, it was on lower volume, suggesting there's not a lot of emphasis and a lot of support from those institutions. Then on this day, we had a slight gap down and then a push towards all-time highs, but then a very poor close on higher volume. This is definitely a warning sign right here. And then this day, we had a gap up, but a very poor close, taking out this day's low. Once again, a warning sign, and a lot of leading stocks weren't acting great on this day as well. Then on this day right here, Thursday the 15th, we had a pretty flat open, a move all the way down to the 21 EMA, and then a strong push off the lows, but obviously that didn't stick on Friday. We had a gap up, and then a very poor close basically at the lows, and from this bar, the expectation is sideways or lower. And going over to a weekly chart as well, the expectation is sideways or lower. And you can see we finished once again right near the lows on higher volume than the previous week. Going over to the S&P 500, this looks pretty similar. Going back to a daily chart, once again, a very poor close to the week. And there's actually a bearish outside day taking out the high and low of Thursday's bar. And these two major indexes, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ composite, actually look better than most indexes out there because larger caps in general have been faring pretty well. And if we go over to an index like the IWM, the Russell 2000, once again, this really shows the true nature of many growth stocks out there. A lot of destruction below all three declining major indexes and even below the 200-day moving average. And once again, very poor action on this Friday, a bearish outside day. Looking at the IWO, this is more small cap growth, once again below all the major indexes, and looks like it just needs a lot of time to base build and reset before a potential new uptrend. And this index has actually been showing poor action the previous 2 weeks, so it really was the larger caps holding up the rest of the market. And lastly, taking a look at the FFTY, this once again shows a lot of destruction in growth stocks, and it's very surprising to see charts like this one, the IWO, IWM, which are basically at their base lows or close to it, while the overall indexes, the NASDAQ composite and S&P 500, which have more larger cap names, are right near all-time highs. So there's a lot of destruction under the surface here. And at least for me, as a swing trader, position trader, it's very volatile. It's hard to manage risk. And at this point, there's just not too many great looking charts out there. So moving on, let's talk about the potential new leadership. As I mentioned previously, this is often a great way to see how overall stocks are doing because these are kind of the leaders in the market, both to the upside and the downside. So starting things off, we've got QFIN, which had a huge gap down, but has been supported since, but pretty anemic action on low volume, even though it has increased quite a bit from this gap down. Still not showing a lot of conviction, and this would need a lot of time before I would consider taking up an entry. GLBE was the only one of these other than QFIN on this list that was positive on the week. And we had a nice push off the lows here from the 21 EMA area, but then a very bad day here on this Wednesday, trying to break out to all-time highs, rejected on very high volume. And I always take special note of bars like this that are very negative on high volume because they could indicate further weakness in the near future. However, at this point, we have been supported at the 21 EMA and had a little bit of a move up on this Friday. However, this is on much lower volume than this negative day. Moving on to FRHC, this one had a gap down, but then pretty much went sideways against the 21 EMA. A nice upside reversal action on this Thursday as well as this week's Wednesday, finishing well off the lows. However, we did have an inside day and down on this Friday, so this chart looks a little bit weak. However, this downside is on pretty low volume, at least the recent action, although this gap down did have pretty high volume. So overall, not the strongest looking chart, but as with many charts here, this recent decrease isn't on huge volume, which is a slight positive, but it's kind of normal for summer action. DocuSign looks to be among the better of the growth stock charts at this moment. Had a nice upside reversal off the 21 EMA and holding this base pivot right here. But we do have a pretty negative bar on this day on Wednesday, although on below average volume. And this upside reversal was on higher volume. So this looks decent. This is probably one of the better looking charts out there at this point. C Limited doesn't look great. Big upside reversal at the 50-day, but then a bearish outside day on Wednesday and then fall through to the downside on Thursday and Friday below the 10-day and declining 21 EMA, but staying above the 50-day for the time being. Shopify also holding up reasonably well within this handle, but you've got some warning signs here, some bad closes on this Wednesday the 7th, as well as this Wednesday, big downside reversal and fall through to the downside on Thursday and Friday below the 21 EMA. Zscaler holding that key moving average and looks pretty good. And once again, this decline on this stock at least isn't on super high volume, which is a positive. A nice upside reversal action on Friday on slightly higher volume as well, as it's forming a handle below this high. Ford just kind of declining here below the 50-day, doesn't look great. ASAN holding up reasonably well, and you can see from its high to these lows is about 12.5%, 10% or so, so holding up pretty well above the 21 EMA. However, this is the first time that it's closed within this run below the 10-day moving average, so that could be a little bit of a changing character. However, this remains a very strong stock, one of the strongest in the market at this point. CrowdStrike pulling back on not really the highest volume here, but you do have some pretty bad days, down 2%, down 2% again, and then an inside day to the end of the week on Friday. Overall, holding up reasonably well near this pivot, although it did close below it to end out the week. And I would like to see some action here, maybe an inside day and up to start the week next week, because you do see some demand coming in at these prices, as you can see from this bar on July 1st. Moving on to net, this is declining back below the 21 EMA, just barely, but you can see it's not on drastic volume, although we do have 2 above average days, and overall it is holding above this low around 100 and holding above this base pivot right here. MDB declining below the 200-day at this point, doesn't look great. I'll probably take this one off the list. And moving on to Zim, we've got the start of a base here. Really this bar and this bar were the warning signs as it broke the 21 EMA pretty much for the first time during this entire run up. And now it just looks like it's forming the left side of a base below all the key moving averages. SPT below the 21 EMA, not a great bar here, although it was on below average volume, but still declining and in between the 21 and 50 SMA at this point. App, a recent IPO, really falling apart here. And the warning sign really was, first of all, the velocity of this move downwards, and then how it didn't really respect this pivot at all. And for me, this is no touch, and I'll be taking it off the list this week. And moving on, we've got Roblox, another recent IPO that was leading. This doesn't look great below the 50-day moving average. This day especially was a warning sign, and these declines are on above average volume. And potentially this is forming out the left side of a base, and you've got a potential double bottom here using this day right here, this low, as the left side of the base. NVIDIA, the leader in this market, really the large cap leader, which is trending beautifully above the 10-day, broke that this week on high volume. And this is very worrisome. This was the leader in the market. And you've got basically no support off the lows here on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday on increasingly large down volume. DEN also breaking down below the 50-day moving average. Doesn't look great. And lastly, we've got SBLK also breaking down here below all the key moving averages and still above this 200-day moving average, but looks like it's heading that way very soon as it starts to make out a base. So overall, there is a lot of damage that was done to especially the bottom of this list. You do have some holding up reasonably well. CrowdStrike Net, and DocuSign, which are declining on below average volume for the most part and holding close to those pivots. But many of these stocks, many of the overall growth leaders got hit very hard last week, and it's going to take some time to heal that damage and set up new opportunities. So with that said, let's move on to my focus list and check out this list to see how it performed. And GLBE, we already talked about, was the only green stock on this list. So overall, these got hit very hard last week. And this is why it's so important to manage your risk and be aware of the overall market conditions, as well as being able to basically be nimble and react to changes. So moving on, let's talk about SHOP. This is also holding up reasonably well. You do have some above average selling days in here and some downside reversals, but it's holding close at 21 EMA. Bill also pulling back pretty hard, large volume on this down day, but an upside reversal on this Friday. So potentially holding up here within this handle. Etsy doesn't look great below the 200-day once again, and just kind of leaking down. And you do have some above average selling days within this pullback. KRNT doesn't look great. This day especially broke these two lows, which isn't a good sign. And then you had a inside day in the lower half of this bar, and then an inside day and down to end the week on Friday, ending at the lows below this low as well. So this does not look good at all. SPT, we already talked about. Roku pulling back on reasonably low volume, but still pulling back all the same and below all these lows. Doesn't look great. So you really want to see some demand come in, especially because we're right at the 400 level and this prior important level of resistance. Roblox we covered. NTLA pulling back on lower than average volume. Maybe it finds support near the 21 EMA. It looks like it had an inside day to end the week on this Friday, so maybe an inside day and up next week. So I will continue to watch the stock, and you can see it found support right basically at this high volume close. This is why it's so important to keep track of these, especially on a power earnings gap up. CELH doesn't look great. This bar was the first warning sign, the very poor close. Then we had fall through to the downside on this Wednesday, a very bad sign, and it broke the 21 EMA and didn't hold the 50 SMA to end out the week. Fiverr also leaking downwards here on very high volume, doesn't look great, below the 50 SMA at this point. Upwork, I tried this. I bought this breakout right here and basically was stopped out for a very small gain, I think 1% on this day as it was dropping on high volume. And you can see it really got destroyed on this day, down 17.3%. This is why it's so important to have your stop losses in place. And lastly, we've got DDD, which also leaked the entire day. And we had an expectation breaker as it started to break out here. Then it completely reversed basically at the beginning of the trading day. And from that point on, it was just sold off the entire week. So this does not look great. So once again, we do see a lot of destruction, especially at the bottom half of this list. And overall this Sunday, I will be releasing another watch list basically of stocks that are holding up well within their handles or above their 21 EMAs. That could be actionable if the overall market decides to resume the uptrend next week. And tomorrow on Sunday, I will be posting a watch list of stocks that are holding up well within their handles and above key moving averages. So make sure you guys tune in for that. But now let's move on to sentiment and start with my sentiment surveys on Twitter. So last week, the bullish reading was 50.5%, a big jump from the previous week. And the stock market was a little bit extended at that point, as I mentioned in last week's stock market outlook video. And this week, we had a big drop from 50.5% to 27.4%, which is quite bearish. But we have to remember that even though this is a very low reading, the pullback basically just started if this will turn into a correction. So even though this reading is quite low, and the contrarian might say that because people got so bearish so quickly, we'll continue on to all-time highs, we have to listen to the actual price action of the stocks first and foremost. That's why this is called a secondary indicator. Looking at the put-call ratio, this did see a nice increase, so it's moving in the right direction. Fears coming back into the market. The bulls versus bears poll is still above 60, not a great sign. And moving on to the name exposure index, we're seeing a reading of 93.27 on the 14th. And whenever I see the 90s, 80s, 100s, that really puts me on guard because it is a little bit too extended historically, and we could be getting a little bit of a pullback or a correction in the coming days or weeks. But once again, this is always secondary to the action of the leaders and the indexes. So moving on to the IBD Big Picture article, the headline is stocks today finish at lows as market outlook takes newly bearish turn, 3 ways to tame higher volatility. Reading through, they discuss the poor action from the indexes, although volume was lower on the NASDAQ and basically flat on the New York Stock Exchange. They discuss the poor action in the IWM, the Dow Jones, and they also talk about the failed breakouts and poor action in recent IPOs like Roblox and TSP, and even how some kind of oil and gas stocks are doing pretty poorly here, cutting below the 50-day moving averages, LPI, CBE, DAC. And they also talk about the market internals, the poor breadth, all of those different indicators. And that's kind of why they've transitioned to an uptrend under pressure from a confirmed uptrend. And they have a few suggestions here on how to keep your losses as small as possible, be quicker to cut stocks, and try to really tame the market volatility and not be too exposed at this moment. So overall, their current outlook is an uptrend under pressure. We have 6 distribution days on the S&P 500 and 3 on the NASDAQ. You do have BNTX and MRNA doing quite well, and we'll take a look at those charts in just a second. But these really have been the 1 or 2 standouts from my watch list during this recent action. We've got a whole bunch of leaders down in volume on this list. So taking a quick look at MRNA, this was a focus list stock just a few weeks ago off the confluence of the base pivot as well as the 21 EMA. And you could have caught it right here as it broke above these highs, and it's had a really strong run here. Also an undercut and rally. Oops reversal on this Thursday would have been actionable, and from this point you're up about 30%. So this has been super strong, really great volume as well coming in, but definitely short-term extended at this point. And just because 1 or 2 stocks are doing well doesn't mean the overall market is healthy. And going over to BNTX is also strong off the 50-day moving average. Nice oops reversal as well on this Thursday, and then nice fall through to the upside off the 50-day once again starting on the 14th. So those stocks are acting very well and could even be kind of predicting and highlighting the potential for additional booster vaccines. And finally, we've got the Wishwell blog GMI Signal, which is still green since May 26, and the GMI score on Friday was a 4 out of 6. However, Dr. Wish does mention that due to many failed breakouts, which I've definitely seen as well, he is getting more defensive. So overall, my current outlook has shifted from a confirmed uptrend back to an uptrend under pressure. And this is because of the negative action from the market leaders, the market indexes, as well as many of my positions and recent trades getting stopped out as they broke key levels. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And I'll see you guys in future videos.